You have 30 seconds to tell me why I shouldn't marry the woman who actually deserves everything you've built. The silence that followed my declaration could have shattered crystal. 5 of the wealthiest women in the country sat frozen around our dining table, their perfectly applied makeup unable to hide the shock twisting their faces. My father's hand gripped his wine glass so tightly I thought it might explode. And Mara, sweet, beautiful Mara, stood by the kitchen door with a serving tray in her trembling hands, looking like she wanted to disappear into the marble floor. But I wasn't backing down. Not this time. You know, people always talk about karma, about how the universe has a way of balancing things out. They say strength isn't about having power, it's about using that power to protect the people who matter. Well, I'd spent 28 years watching my family treat the most incredible woman I'd ever known like she was invisible, and tonight, that ended. Hey everyone, hope you're doing well wherever you're watching from. Whether you're dealing with sunny skies or stormy weather, I've got a story that's going to make you forget all about what's happening outside your window. My name is Evan Cole, and this is the story of how I went from being a spineless heir who let others control my life to the man who chose love over legacy, and discovered that sometimes the greatest fortune isn't money, but finding someone who sees your soul when everyone else only sees your bank account. Picture this, me, standing in front of 5 women who collectively owned half the East Coast, pointing past all of them to a woman in a simple black uniform who had just served us dinner, declaring that she would be my wife. But before I tell you how that moment changed everything, let me ask you to hit that like button if you believe real love conquers all, subscribe if you want to hear more stories about people who chose courage over comfort, and drop a comment telling me about a time someone surprised you with their strength. Trust me, you're going to want to stick around for this one. But let me start from the beginning, because the road to that dining room confrontation began 20 years earlier, when I was 8 years old and drowning in our family's swimming pool. I was 28 when my father made his announcement, but I still remembered being that scared little boy who thought money could fix everything. Back then, I believed my father was some kind of superhero, that our mansion was a castle, and that everyone who worked for us was there because they loved us. I thought love meant expensive gifts and that respect came automatically with the Cole name. God, I was naive. I believed marriage was about finding someone who looked good at charity galas. I thought a wife should be chosen like a business merger, compatible assets, shared social circles, mutual benefit. I believed the women my father approved of were automatically the right choice because they came from good families, with proper breeding. I even believed that Mara, who had been taking care of me since I was 8, was just doing her job when she stayed up all night when I had nightmares, or when she taught me to tie my shoes, or when she was the only person who remembered I was allergic to shellfish. I was the kind of trusting, giving person who assumed everyone had good intentions. When the wealthy daughters of my father's friends flirted with me at parties, I thought they actually liked my terrible jokes. When business associates invited me to exclusive events, I believed they enjoyed my company. When my father talked about suitable matches, I trusted that he wanted my happiness. Looking back, I can see how perfectly I was set up for what happened next. Every relationship in my life had been transactional except one, and I was too blind to see it. The setup began on a Tuesday morning in October when my father called me into his study. Harrison Cole didn't do casual conversations, every interaction was a board meeting, every family dinner a strategic planning session. At 72, he still commanded every room he entered, still made grown men stutter when he asked them questions, still believed that money was the only currency that mattered. Evan, he said, not looking up from the financial report spread across his mahogany desk, it's time we discussed your future. I should have known right then that my life was about to implode. When Harrison Cole discussed your future, it meant he'd already decided it for you. I'm retiring in 6 months, he continued, finally meeting my eyes with that steel-gray stare that had intimidated senators and CEOs. The board expects a smooth transition. That means you need a wife. Not, I hope you find love. Not when you're ready to settle down. A wife. Like ordering office supplies. Dad, I don't think. I've identified 5 exceptional candidates, he interrupted, sliding a leather portfolio across the desk. Each from established families, each with the intelligence and social standing necessary to represent the Cole legacy. You'll meet them all at dinner this Friday. You'll choose one by the end of the evening. I opened the portfolio with hands that had started shaking. 5 photographs stared back at me: Victoria Ashworth, whose family owned half the shipping industry. Celeste Pemberton, whose father controlled 3 major banks. Diana Rothschild, whose art collection was worth more than most countries' GDP. Sophia Blackwell, whose tech empire rivaled Silicon Valley giants. And Rebecca Sterling, whose pharmaceutical company had patents on life-saving medications. Beautiful women. Accomplished women. Women who could buy and sell small nations before breakfast. Women who had never once asked me how I was feeling. This is insane, I said, but my voice came out weak, uncertain. 28 years of conditioning don't disappear overnight. This is business, my father replied. Love is a luxury we can't afford. These women understand that. They're prepared to enter a partnership that benefits everyone involved. A partnership. Not a marriage. Not a relationship. A merger with a marriage certificate. That's when I heard the soft knock on the study door, followed by Mara's gentle voice. Excuse me, Mr. Cole. Should I prepare the guest rooms for Friday evening? She stepped into the room carrying a silver tea service, moving with that quiet grace that had always amazed me. At 35, Mara Williams was more beautiful than any woman in that portfolio, but she carried herself like she was trying to take up as little space as possible. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple bun, her uniform was perfectly pressed, and her warm brown eyes held a kindness that money couldn't buy. My father barely glanced at her. Yes, prepare 5 rooms. And ensure the dining room is set for 8. Of course, sir. She set down the tea service and turned to leave, but not before our eyes met for just a moment. In that brief glance, I saw something that made my chest tight: concern. Not for the dinner party or the guest rooms, but for me. When had anyone else looked at me like that? Mara, I called out before she could leave. How long have you worked for our family? She paused, clearly surprised to be addressed directly. 20 years, Mr. Evan. 20 years. She'd been here since I was 8, since that day when everything changed, since the moment that created a debt I'd never acknowledged but never forgotten. Thank you, I said, and I meant it for so much more than the tea. After she left, my father's expression had turned calculating. I trust you understand the importance of Friday evening, Evan. The future of everything we've built depends on your choice. But as I stared at those 5 photographs, all I could think about was the woman who had just left the room. The woman who remembered that I liked my tea with honey instead of sugar. The woman who had never once asked me for anything, never tried to impress me with her connections or her bank account, never treated me like a prize to be won. The woman who had saved my life and then spent 20 years pretending it never happened. Friday was 3 days away, and I had no idea that it would become the night that changed everything, not just for me, but for everyone who thought they knew what the Cole family was really about. What I didn't know was that Mara had secrets of her own, secrets that would make my father's carefully planned evening explode in ways none of us could imagine. And I definitely didn't know that choosing her wouldn't just be about love, it would be about saving everything my family had built from a threat we never saw coming. But first, I had to survive dinner with 5 women who saw me as a business opportunity, while the woman I actually cared about served us wine and pretended she didn't exist. The countdown to Friday had begun, and I was about to learn that sometimes the most important choice you'll ever make is the one that looks like it will destroy everything you've ever known. The next morning, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years, seeking out Mara instead of avoiding the parts of the house where she worked. I told myself I needed to discuss the dinner arrangements, but honestly, I just wanted to see her again without my father's calculating presence filling the room. I found her in the library, carefully dusting the first edition books that my father collected but never read. She moved with such reverence, like each book was precious, and I remembered how she used to read to me when I was sick as a child. She had this way of bringing stories to life that made me forget I was trapped in a mansion that felt more like a museum than a home. "Mara," I said softly, not wanting to startle her. She turned, and for just a moment, her professional mask slipped. I saw surprise, maybe even pleasure, before she caught herself and straightened. "Mr. Evan. Is there something you need for Friday's dinner?" "Actually, I wanted to ask you something." I stepped closer, close enough to catch the faint scent of the lavender soap she always used. "Do you remember when I was 8? The swimming pool incident?" Her hand stilled on the leather-bound spine she'd been cleaning. "That was a long time ago. You saved my life that day. I did what anyone would have done. But that wasn't true, and we both knew it. Anyone else would have called for help, would have run to get my father or the other staff. Mara had jumped into that pool fully clothed, had pulled me out and performed CPR while water streamed from her hair and her uniform clung to her body. When my father finally arrived, she was already helping me cough up pool water, already making sure I was breathing. And then she'd quietly disappeared to change her clothes while my father called the family doctor, never mentioning that she'd been the one to save me. Never asking for recognition or reward. Just grateful that I was alive. "You never told anyone it was you," I said. "It wasn't important who did it. Only that you were safe." That was Mara in a nutshell, always putting others first, always making herself smaller so everyone else could shine brighter. It had taken me 20 years to realize how rare that kind of selflessness was, especially in my world where everyone wanted something. "It was important to me," I said, and watched her cheeks flush slightly. "Mr. Evan, I should get back to work. Your father expects the house to be perfect for Friday." She was retreating again, hiding behind formality and duty. But I'd seen the flash of something real in her eyes, the same warmth I remembered from childhood when she'd bandage my scraped knees or help me with homework that my expensive tutors couldn't explain in ways I understood. "What do you think about this whole dinner thing?" I asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. Mara's hands resumed their careful dusting, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. "It's not my place to have opinions about your family's decisions. I'm asking for your opinion, not the staff handbook response." She was quiet for so long I thought she wouldn't answer. Then, without looking at me, she said, "I think you deserve to be happy. And I think happiness rarely comes from arrangements made by other people." It was the most honest thing anyone had said to me about the situation, and it came from the woman my father would never think to consult about anything important. "What if I told you I don't want to marry any of those women?" "Then I'd say you should tell your father that." "And what if I told you there's someone else I've been thinking about? Someone who's been part of my life for years, but I've been too blind to see what was right in front of me?" This time she did look at me, and I saw something flicker across her face, hope, maybe, or fear. "I'd say that person is very lucky, and I hope you find the courage to follow your heart." We stood there in the morning light streaming through the tall windows, surrounded by thousands of books filled with love stories, and I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to explain that she was the someone else, that every conversation with her felt more real than any interaction I'd had with the women in my father's portfolio. I wanted to tell her that when I imagined my future, she was the only person who made it feel like something worth having. But before I could find the words, my father's voice echoed through the house, "Evan. My office. Now." The spell broke. Mara immediately busied herself with the books again, and I was reminded of all the reasons why what I was feeling was impossible. She worked for my family. She depended on us for her livelihood. And my father would never, ever approve. I should go, I said. Yes, sir. We were back to sir. The moment of connection had vanished like it never happened. I found my father in his office with Ashley Webb, our family's longtime attorney and my father's closest friend. Ashley had been handling Cole family business for 30 years, and he looked at me with the same calculating expression my father wore, like I was a problem to be solved rather than a person with feelings. Evan, my father said without preamble, Ashley has prepared the prenuptial agreements for Friday's candidates. Each contract protects our assets while ensuring the chosen bride understands her role in the family business. Ashley slid 5 thick documents across the desk. Standard terms, he said in his dry, precise voice. The bride maintains her personal wealth but has no claim to Cole assets. Any children become heirs to the Cole fortune. Divorce results in a modest settlement but no ongoing financial obligations. I stared at the contracts, feeling sick. You're talking about marriage like it's a business acquisition. Because it is, my father replied. Love is a luxury, Evan. Legacy is forever. What if I refuse? What if I don't choose any of them? The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. My father's gray eyes went cold, and Ashley shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Then you forfeit your inheritance, my father said quietly. The Cole empire goes to charity, and you're left with nothing but your trust fund, which, I should mention, expires on your 30th birthday. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. My own father was threatening to disown me if I didn't marry a stranger. Everything I'd been raised to believe about family loyalty, about unconditional love, crumbled in that moment. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. This family has built something that will last centuries, but only if we make smart choices. Emotional choices destroy dynasties, Evan. I won't let you be the generation that throws it all away for infatuation. Ashley cleared his throat. Perhaps we should discuss the candidates' qualifications again. Each woman brings significant advantages to a potential union. For the next hour, they dissected the 5 women like they were stock portfolios. Victoria's shipping connections could expand our international reach. Celeste's banking relationships would secure favorable loan terms for future acquisitions. Diana's art world influence would elevate our social standing. Sophia's tech expertise could modernize our traditional industries. Rebecca's pharmaceutical patents could diversify our holdings. Not once did they mention personality, kindness, compatibility, or love. Friday evening will proceed as planned, my father concluded. You'll spend time with each candidate, and by the end of the night, you'll make your choice. The engagement will be announced in the society pages on Sunday. I left that office feeling like I'd been sentenced to life in prison. Everything I'd thought I knew about my father, about my family, about my future, had been revealed as an illusion. I wasn't his son, I was his business succession plan. But as I walked through the house, I passed the kitchen and heard Mara humming softly while she prepared lunch. It was the same lullaby she used to sing when I had nightmares as a child, and suddenly I remembered something my father had forgotten in all his calculations. I wasn't 8 years old anymore. I wasn't helpless or dependent on his approval. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop letting other people decide what my life should look like. The real question was whether I had the courage to choose the woman who had always chosen me, even when it meant risking everything I'd been raised to value. Friday was 2 days away, and I was starting to realize that this dinner wasn't just about choosing a wife, it was about choosing who I wanted to be. The dutiful son who followed orders, or the man who finally stood up for what mattered. What I didn't know was that Mara had been having her own conversations, her own moments of realization. And the secrets she'd been keeping for 20 years were about to collide with my father's plans in ways that would change everything. The first betrayal had been my father's ultimatum. But it wouldn't be the last revelation that shattered everything I thought I knew about my family, my future, and the woman who had been silently holding our world together while everyone else took her for granted. Thursday night, I couldn't sleep. Tomorrow would change everything, and I still had no idea what I was going to do. I'd spent the day watching my father's staff transform our dining room into something that looked more like a corporate boardroom than a place where people shared meals. Crystal glasses that cost more than most people's cars, silverware that belonged in a museum, flowers flown in from some exotic location I couldn't pronounce. Everything designed to impress. Nothing designed to comfort. Around midnight, I gave up on sleep and wandered downstairs to the kitchen, hoping to find some of the leftover cookies Mara always kept in the pantry. What I found instead was Mara herself, sitting at the small staff table with a cup of tea and a worn photo in her hands. She looked up when I entered, startled. "Mr. Evan, I'm sorry, I was just..." "Don't apologize," I said, moving to sit across from her. I couldn't sleep either. She started to put the photo away, but I caught a glimpse of it, a young woman in a graduation cap and gown, beaming at the camera. The woman looked familiar, but I couldn't place her. "Who is that?" I asked gently. Mara hesitated, then turned the photo so I could see it properly. "My daughter. Zoe. She graduated from medical school last month." The words hit me like a thunderbolt. "Your daughter? She's 27. She's starting her residency at Johns Hopkins in pediatric surgery." Mara's voice was soft but filled with unmistakable pride. "She doesn't know I work here. She thinks I manage a small cleaning business." I stared at the photo, my mind reeling. 27 years old. Which meant Mara had been pregnant when she started working for us, had been a single mother raising a child while taking care of mine. And somehow, she'd managed to put that child through medical school. "Mara, how did you? I mean, medical school is expensive, and we don't pay." "Enough," she finished quietly. "No, you don't. But I've been saving every penny for 20 years. I worked 3 other jobs when you were in school, cleaned offices at night, did laundry for other families on weekends. Zoe never went without, but she also never knew how hard it was. The shame that washed over me was overwhelming. While I'd been complaining about trust fund limitations and inheritance pressures, Mara had been working herself to exhaustion to give her daughter opportunities. While I'd been taking her care for granted, she'd been sacrificing everything for someone else's future. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" "My father could have helped, could have." "Could have what?" Mara's voice was sharper than I'd ever heard it. "Your father doesn't help people like me, Evan. He uses them. If he'd known about Zoe, he would have found a way to control her, to make her success about his generosity instead of my sacrifice." She was right, and we both knew it. Harrison Cole didn't give gifts, he made investments that he expected to pay dividends. Besides, Mara continued, her voice softening again, "Zoe earned everything she has. I just made sure she had the chance to earn it." I looked at this woman who had been part of my daily life for 20 years, and realized I'd never really seen her at all. I'd seen the maid, the caretaker, the quiet presence who made my life easier. I'd never seen the mother, the fighter, the woman who had built something extraordinary out of nothing. "She's beautiful," I said, looking at the photo again. "She looks like you. She's better than me. Smarter, stronger, more confident. She's going to save children's lives, Evan. She's going to matter in ways that cleaning houses never could." "You matter," I said, and meant it more than I'd ever meant anything. "You've always mattered." Mara met my eyes, and for a moment, the careful distance she always maintained disappeared. Tomorrow you're going to choose a wife from 5 women who have everything I'll never have. Money, status, education, connections. They're going to compete for the chance to share your life, and one of them will win because she fits into your world in ways I never could. What if I don't want someone who fits into my world? What if I want someone who makes me want to be better than my world expects? The question hung between us like a bridge neither of us was sure we should cross. Mara's hands trembled slightly as she folded the photo and put it away. You should get some sleep, she said. Tomorrow is important. But I couldn't let her retreat again. Not when we were finally being honest with each other. Mara, what if I told you that none of those women matter to me? What if I told you that the only person I've ever been able to imagine a real future with is sitting right here? She stood up so quickly her chair scraped against the floor. Don't. Don't what? Don't say things you don't mean. Don't make this harder than it already is. What if I mean every word? She turned to face me, and I saw tears in her eyes. Then you're going to break both our hearts, because this can't happen, Evan. I work for your family. I depend on this job. And your father would destroy me if he thought for 1 second that I was trying to manipulate his son. You're not manipulating me. You're the only person who's never tried to manipulate me. It doesn't matter what's true. It only matters what people believe. She was right, and that made it worse. In my father's world, a relationship between us would automatically be seen as calculated, as a poor woman trying to trap a rich man. No one would believe that she'd never asked me for anything, never even hinted that she wanted more than the professional relationship we'd maintained for 20 years. So what do I do? I asked. Marry someone I don't love to protect a fortune I never asked for. You do what's best for everyone involved. And what if what's best for me is you? Mara closed her eyes, and when she opened them, I saw a pain that made my chest ache. Then you learn to live with disappointment, like the rest of us do. She left me sitting in that kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of her tea and the weight of everything we couldn't say. But as I sat there in the darkness, I made a decision that would have terrified me a week earlier. I wasn't going to choose any of the 5 women my father had selected. I wasn't going to pretend that love was a luxury I couldn't afford. And I wasn't going to let the best thing that had ever happened to me walk away because other people couldn't see what I saw. Tomorrow night, I was going to stand up in front of everyone who mattered in my father's world, and I was going to choose the woman who had spent 20 years proving that worth had nothing to do with wealth. The only question was whether Mara would forgive me for putting her in an impossible position, or whether my declaration of love would destroy the one relationship that had ever felt real. But as I finally headed back to my room, I realized something that changed everything. I'd rather lose my inheritance and keep my integrity than spend the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I'd been brave enough to choose love over legacy. Friday was 12 hours away, and I was about to find out whether the woman who had saved my life as a child would be willing to save my soul as an adult. What I didn't know was that my father had his own plans for the evening, plans that went far beyond simply choosing a bride. And Mara's past was about to collide with our present in ways that would make my romantic declaration look like the least shocking thing that happened that night. The catastrophe was coming, and none of us were prepared for how completely it would change everything we thought we knew about power, family, and what it really meant to choose love in a world built on lies. Friday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that made everything look perfect from the outside. By 4 in the afternoon, our house had been transformed into something that belonged in a magazine spread about how the wealthy lived. Every surface gleamed, every flower was positioned precisely, and the dining room looked like a stage set for the most important performance of my life. I spent the day watching Mara coordinate with the catering staff, her movements efficient and graceful as she ensured everything would be flawless. She hadn't looked at me directly since our conversation in the kitchen, and the distance between us felt like a physical ache. Every time I tried to catch her eye, she found something urgent that required her attention elsewhere. My father, meanwhile, was in his element. He'd spent the morning on calls with Ashley Webb, finalizing what he called contingency plans for each potential outcome. I didn't like the sound of that, but when I asked what he meant, he just smiled and told me to focus on making the right choice. "Remember, Evan," he said as we stood in his office, adjusting his cufflinks with the precision of a man preparing for battle, "tonight isn't just about you. It's about the future of everything we've built. These women understand that. They're prepared to be partners in something bigger than themselves. What if I'm not prepared for that?" His gray eyes sharpened. "Then you'd better get prepared quickly. The first guest arrives in 2 hours." Victoria Ashworth was the first to arrive, stepping out of a car that probably cost more than most people's houses. She was stunning in the way that money could make anyone stunning: perfect hair, perfect makeup, perfect dress that had definitely been designed specifically for her body. When she smiled at me, it was the practiced smile of someone who had been trained from birth to charm wealthy men. "Evan," she said, extending a hand that felt cold despite the warm evening. "I've been looking forward to this." "Victoria. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the opportunity. Your father has told me so much about the family business. I have some ideas about expanding the shipping operations into emerging markets." Of course she did. We weren't even through the front door, and she was already talking business. As I led her to the sitting room, I caught a glimpse of Mara arranging flowers in the hallway. She glanced up for just a moment, and I saw something in her expression that made my chest tight: resignation, maybe, or the look of someone watching something precious slip away. Celeste Pemberton arrived 15 minutes later, followed by Diana Rothschild, then Sophia Blackwell, and finally Rebecca Sterling. Each woman was more accomplished than the last, each more beautiful, each more perfectly suited to be the wife of a billionaire's heir. They filled our sitting room with the kind of sophisticated conversation that sounded impressive but said nothing real. "The art market is absolutely fascinating right now," Diana was saying, her voice carrying the authority of someone who owned pieces that museums coveted. "I've been advising several collectors on acquisitions that could appreciate significantly over the next decade." "That's interesting," Rebecca replied, "but I think the real growth opportunities are in biotechnology. The pharmaceutical patents I've been developing could revolutionize treatment for several rare diseases." They were all brilliant. They were all successful. They were all exactly what my father had ordered for his son's future wife. And I felt absolutely nothing for any of them. My father moved through the room like a conductor orchestrating a symphony, guiding conversations, highlighting each woman's qualifications, making sure I understood exactly what I would be gaining with each potential choice. He was in his element, and I could see the satisfaction in his eyes as he watched his carefully planned evening unfold. "Ladies," he announced as the grandfather clock chimed 7, "shall we move to the dining room?" The dining room looked like something from a fairy tale, if fairy tales were about corporate mergers instead of true love. Candles flickered on every surface, casting warm light over crystal and silver that had been in our family for generations. The table was set for 8, my father at the head, me at the foot, and the 5 candidates arranged along the sides like pieces on a chessboard. Mara appeared as we took our seats, moving silently around the table to pour wine. She was wearing her usual black uniform, but something about the way the candlelight caught her face made her look more beautiful than any of the women in their designer gowns. When she reached my glass, our fingers brushed for just a moment, and I felt that familiar spark that I'd never experienced with anyone else. "Thank you," I said quietly, and she nodded without meeting my eyes. The dinner conversation flowed like a well-rehearsed play. Each woman had clearly prepared talking points designed to showcase her value as a potential Cole family member. Victoria discussed international trade opportunities. Celeste outlined banking strategies that could increase our liquid assets. Diana described art investments that would elevate our cultural standing. Sophia presented technology integration plans that could modernize our traditional businesses. Rebecca detailed pharmaceutical partnerships that could diversify our portfolio. It was impressive. It was strategic. It was everything my father wanted. And it was slowly killing something inside me. Evan seems quiet tonight, Sophia observed, turning her perfectly made-up face toward me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Are you overwhelmed by all the brilliant women at your table? Something like that, I replied, taking a sip of wine that tasted like ash in my mouth. I imagine it's difficult to choose when you have so many excellent options, Celeste added. But that's what makes you lucky, any choice you make will be the right one. That's when I noticed Mara pause in her serving, just for a moment, as she placed the main course in front of Diana. Her hands were steady, but I caught the slight tightening around her eyes that meant she was fighting some strong emotion. Actually, I said, my voice carrying more clearly than I'd intended, I think luck has very little to do with it. Real choice requires knowing what actually matters to you, not just what looks good on paper. The table went quiet. My father's fork stopped halfway to his mouth, and I could feel his warning glare from across the room. That's very philosophical, Rebecca said with a laugh that sounded forced. But surely practical considerations matter too. Marriage is a partnership, after all. Exactly, Victoria agreed. It's about building something together, combining strengths to create something greater than the sum of its parts. They were saying all the right things, using all the right words, but every sentence felt like another bar in the cage my father was building around my future. What do you think makes a marriage work? I asked, directing the question to the table in general but watching Mara as she continued serving. Shared goals, Celeste said immediately. Mutual respect, Diana added. Compatible lifestyles, Sophia contributed. Financial stability, Rebecca concluded. All perfectly reasonable answers. All completely missing the point. What about love? I asked. The silence that followed was deafening. The 5 women exchanged glances, clearly unsure how to respond to such an unexpected question. Love is important, Victoria finally said carefully, but it's not the only factor in a successful partnership. Love grows over time, Celeste added. When 2 people respect each other and work toward common goals, affection naturally develops. My father cleared his throat. Perhaps we should focus on getting to know each other better. Evan, why don't you tell our guests about your plans for the company's future? But I wasn't ready to let the conversation move on. Mara, I said, and every head at the table turned toward the woman who had been silently ensuring our evening ran smoothly. You've been married. What do you think makes a marriage work? The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Mara's eyes went wide, and I could see the panic in her expression. She wasn't supposed to be part of this conversation. She wasn't supposed to have opinions that mattered. I wouldn't know, sir, she said quietly. I was never married. But I remembered the photo from last night, remembered her mentioning Zoe's father in passing years ago. There was a story there, a pain she'd never shared, and suddenly I understood something that made my chest ache. I'm sorry, I said gently. I didn't mean to put you on the spot. It's quite all right, Mr. Evan. She started to move away, but something in her posture, the way she held herself like she was trying to disappear, made me realize that this whole evening was torture for her too. She was watching me choose a wife from women who saw me as a prize to be won, while she served them wine and pretended that 20 years of caring for me meant nothing. Actually, I said, standing up so suddenly that my chair scraped against the floor, I think I need some air. Would you excuse me for a moment? I walked out of that dining room without waiting for an answer, my heart pounding and my hands shaking. I could hear the confused murmur of voices behind me, my father's sharp tone as he tried to smooth over my abrupt departure. But I couldn't sit there for another minute, pretending to consider women who would never know me the way Mara did, who would never care about me the way she had for 20 years. I found myself in the garden, breathing hard and staring up at stars that seemed impossibly far away. The sound of footsteps on gravel made me turn, expecting to see my father coming to drag me back to my responsibilities. Instead, I saw Mara, carrying a glass of water and looking more worried than angry. "You shouldn't have left like that," she said softly. "Your father is furious, and those women are confused." Good. Maybe confusion is better than the certainty that I'm just a business opportunity. "Evan, you have to go back in there. You have to choose one of them. What if I choose you instead?" The words were out before I could stop them, hanging between us in the cool night air like a challenge to everything we'd both been taught about our places in the world. "You can't," she whispered, but there was something in her voice that sounded less like conviction and more like hope. "Why not?" "Because I'm not one of your options. Because your father would never allow it. Because I have nothing to offer you except 20 years of caring about me when no one else did. Except seeing me as a person instead of an inheritance. Except being the only woman I've ever met who makes me want to be better than I am." Mara's eyes filled with tears, and I stepped closer, close enough to see the way the moonlight caught the silver threads in her dark hair. "This is impossible," she said. "Maybe. But it's also the only thing that's ever felt real." Before either of us could think better of it, I reached out and touched her face, and she didn't pull away. For just a moment, we stood there in the garden while my father's carefully planned dinner party continued without us, and I felt more like myself than I had in years. Then the sound of the back door opening shattered the moment, and we sprang apart just as my father appeared on the terrace. "Evan," he called, his voice carrying a warning that made my blood run cold. "Our guests are waiting." As I walked back toward the house, I caught Mara's hand for just a moment. "This isn't over," I whispered. But as we returned to that dining room full of women who wanted to marry me for everything except love, I realized that the real battle was just beginning. And the choice I was about to make would either free us both or destroy everything we'd ever cared about. The pressure was building, the deception was deepening, and in less than an hour, I was going to have to decide whether I was brave enough to choose my heart over my inheritance. What I didn't know was that my father had been planning for this possibility all along, and the consequences of defying him would be more devastating than I could imagine. When we returned to the dining room, the atmosphere had shifted. The 5 women were no longer making polite conversation, they were studying me like I was a puzzle they needed to solve. My father's smile was sharp enough to cut glass, and I could feel the weight of his expectations pressing down on me like a physical force. "Ladies," my father announced as we took our seats, "I think it's time we moved to the evening's main event. Evan has had the opportunity to meet each of you, and I believe he's ready to make his decision." My mouth went dry. "Dad, I thought we were going to have more time to." "Time is a luxury we don't have," he interrupted smoothly. "The board meeting is Monday morning, and they'll expect to meet your fiancé. Evan, please stand and tell us which of these exceptional women you've chosen to be your wife." The room fell silent except for the soft clink of Mara setting down the dessert plates. I could feel 5 pairs of eyes watching me expectantly, each woman confident that her qualifications made her the obvious choice. My father leaned back in his chair with the satisfaction of a man who had orchestrated the perfect business deal. But as I stood there, looking at these accomplished, beautiful women who would give me everything except what I actually wanted, something inside me snapped. "You're right," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I have made my choice." Victoria straightened, smoothing her dress. Celeste adjusted her jewelry. Diana lifted her chin with regal confidence. Sophia smiled like she'd already won. Rebecca clasped her hands together in anticipation. I choose Mara. The words fell into the silence like stones into still water, creating ripples that spread through the room and shattered everything my father had carefully constructed. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then chaos erupted. What? Victoria's voice was sharp with disbelief. The maid? Celeste's perfectly composed facade cracked. You're choosing the maid? This has to be a joke, Diana said, her cultured voice rising. Harrison, surely you're not going to allow this. But my father wasn't looking at the women. He was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, not just anger, but something that looked almost like hatred. Evan, he said quietly, and somehow his whisper was more terrifying than if he'd shouted. Sit down. Now. No. The word came out stronger than I'd expected. I'm 28 years old, and I'm done letting you choose my life for me. Mara had gone completely still by the sideboard, the serving spoon frozen in her hand. Her face had drained of all color, and she was staring at me like I'd just signed both our death warrants. You can't be serious, Sophia said, her voice shrill. She's the help. She's nobody. She's not nobody, I said, turning to face the table full of women who suddenly looked like strangers. She's the woman who saved my life when I was 8 years old. She's the woman who worked 3 jobs to put her daughter through medical school. She's the woman who has shown me more kindness in 20 years than any of you have managed in one evening. Her daughter. Rebecca's voice was faint. The maid has a daughter. A daughter who's a doctor, I said proudly. A daughter she raised alone while taking care of my family and never asking for anything in return. My father stood up slowly, his movements controlled but his eyes blazing. Ashley, he said without taking his gaze off me. Please escort our guests to the sitting room. I need to speak with my son privately. Harrison, Victoria said, her voice tight with barely controlled fury, if this is some kind of test. It's not a test, my father replied. It's a mistake that will be corrected immediately. The 5 women filed out of the dining room, their designer heels clicking against the marble floor like gunshots. I could hear them whispering angrily in the hallway, their voices carrying words like humiliation and insult and lawsuit. When the door closed behind them, my father turned to Mara, who was still standing frozen by the sideboard. You, he said, his voice like ice. Get out. Dad, don't. Get out, he roared, and Mara flinched like she'd been struck. She set down the serving spoon with trembling hands and hurried toward the door. Mara, wait, I called after her, but she didn't stop. She couldn't look at me as she fled the room, and I saw tears streaming down her face. When we were alone, my father walked around the table until he was standing directly in front of me. I'd never seen him look so furious, so completely out of control. 28 years, he said quietly. 28 years I've invested in you. The best schools, the best tutors, the best opportunities money could buy. And this is how you repay me? By throwing it all away for a woman who cleans toilets for a living? She's more than that, and you know it. She's nothing. The words exploded out of him. She's a servant who has clearly been manipulating you for years, filling your head with romantic nonsense while she planned to trap you into marriage. That's not true. She never. Of course it's true. Do you think it's a coincidence that she's been here for 20 years? Do you think it's an accident that she saved your life when you were a child? She's been playing a long game, Evan, and you're too naive to see it. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. You're wrong. Am I? Then explain to me how a woman who makes $30,000 a year managed to put her daughter through medical school. Explain to me how she afforded Johns Hopkins tuition on a maid's salary. The question stopped me cold. I'd wondered about that myself last night, had been amazed by Mara's sacrifice and determination. But now my father was twisting it into something ugly, something calculated. She worked other jobs. She saved every penny. Did she? Or did she have help? Financial help from someone who felt grateful for her services? The implication made me sick. If you're suggesting that I gave her money, I'm not suggesting anything. I'm telling you what happened. My father walked to his desk and pulled out a thick folder. Ashley has been investigating your little friend since I noticed your interest in her. The results are quite illuminating. He threw the folder on the table, and photographs spilled out. Bank statements. Financial records. And there, in black and white, were deposits into Mara's account. Large deposits. Regular deposits. Going back years. $50,000, my father said, his voice deadly calm. Every year for the past 10 years. $500,000 total, all traced back to your personal account. I stared at the papers, my mind reeling. That's impossible. I never. You never authorized it directly. But you did sign a standing order when you turned 18, giving me power of attorney to manage your charitable giving. I've been making donations in your name for years, to hospitals, schools, worthy causes. And apparently, to our maid's daughter's education fund. The room spun around me. You've been giving her money without telling me? I've been protecting our family's interests. When I realized she was becoming too attached to you, I decided it was better to ensure her loyalty through financial dependence rather than risk her becoming a problem. You bought her silence. I bought her compliance. And it worked perfectly until tonight, when you decided to throw away everything we've built for a woman who has been taking our money for years. I felt like I was drowning. Everything I thought I knew about Mara, about our relationship, about the purity of her feelings, was crumbling around me. Had she known about the money? Had she been playing a part all these years, pretending to care about me while secretly taking payments from my father? The best part, my father continued, his voice dripping with satisfaction, is that she doesn't even know the money came from you. As far as she's concerned, it's been anonymous donations to a scholarship fund. But if you marry her, she'll find out the truth. She'll discover that her daughter's entire medical education was paid for by the family she's been trying to seduce. Stop, I whispered, but he wasn't finished. How do you think she'll feel when she realizes that everything she's accomplished, everything she's proud of, was built on Cole family charity? How do you think her precious daughter will feel when she learns that her medical degree was bought and paid for by the people her mother works for? The cruelty of it took my breath away. My father hadn't just been controlling Mara's financial situation, he'd been setting up a trap that would destroy her no matter what choice she made. If she stayed away from me, she'd continue taking money she didn't know came from our family. If she didn't stay away, she'd discover that her greatest achievement was built on a lie. You're a monster, I said. I'm a businessman. And you're going to go into that sitting room right now and choose one of those 5 women, or I'm going to make sure Mara Williams never works in this city again. I'll destroy her reputation, her daughter's career, and any chance either of them has at a decent life. You can't. I can do anything I want, Evan. I own this city. I own the people in it. And I own you, whether you want to admit it or not. He was right, and we both knew it. Harrison Cole had the power to destroy lives with a phone call, to ruin careers with a whisper, to make people disappear from polite society without a trace. If I defied him, Mara would pay the price. But as I stood there, surrounded by the wreckage of everything I believed about my family and my future, I realized something that changed everything. I didn't care. I didn't care about the money or the inheritance or the Cole family legacy. I didn't care about my father's threats or his power or his ability to destroy me. The only thing I cared about was the woman who was probably crying in the kitchen right now, thinking that I'd humiliated her in front of people who already looked down on her. No, I said quietly. What? I said no. I'm not choosing any of those women. I'm choosing Mara, and if you want to destroy us both, go ahead and try. My father's face went white with rage. You're making the biggest mistake of your life. Maybe. But it's my mistake to make. I walked out of that dining room and left him standing there with his threats and his money and his carefully constructed plans. I had to find Mara. I had to explain what had happened, had to tell her about the money and the trap my father had set and the choice I was making despite everything. But when I reached the kitchen, it was empty. When I checked her room in the staff quarters, it was empty too. Her few belongings were gone, her bed was made, and there was a single envelope on the pillow with my name written in her careful handwriting. Inside was a letter that broke my heart and changed everything I thought I knew about love, sacrifice, and what it meant to choose someone else's happiness over your own. The devastation was complete. My father had won, Mara was gone, and I was left standing in an empty room, holding the words of a woman who had just walked away from the only chance at happiness either of us had ever had. But the letter also contained a secret that would turn everything upside down again, a truth that my father had never discovered in all his investigations, and a revelation that would make my choice to defy him look like the smartest decision I'd ever made. The midpoint devastation was complete, but the real story was just beginning. I read Mara's letter 3 times before the words finally sank in. Evan. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. I heard enough of your conversation with your father to understand what's happening, and I can't let you destroy your life for me. You were right about one thing, I do have secrets. But not the ones your father thinks. 20 years ago, I came to work for your family because I was desperate. Zoe's father had abandoned us, I had no money, and I needed a job that would let me take care of my baby while I worked. Your mother hired me, and she was kind in ways your father never knew. What I never told anyone is that your mother and I became friends. Real friends. She knew about Zoe, helped me when I was struggling, and made me promise that if anything ever happened to her, I would watch over you. She was worried about the kind of man your father was becoming, worried about what would happen to you if you only had his influence. She died 3 months after I started working here. The cancer took her quickly, but before she went, she made arrangements. She set up a trust fund for Zoe's education, managed through a law firm your father doesn't know about. Every penny of Zoe's medical school tuition came from your mother's money, not your father's charity. I kept the secret because your mother asked me to. She wanted you to have someone in your life who cared about you for who you are, not what you represent. She wanted you to know what real love looks like, even if you never knew where it came from. I'm leaving because I love you too much to let you sacrifice everything for me. Choose one of those women, Evan. Build the life your father wants for you. Be happy, even if it's not with me. The truth about your mother's trust is in a safety deposit box at First National Bank. Box 247. The key is taped under the bottom drawer of my dresser. If you ever need proof of what really happened, it's all there. Take care of yourself. You deserve so much more than you know. All my love. Mara. I sat on her bed, holding that letter, and felt my world collapse completely. My mother had been dead for 20 years, but she'd been protecting me all this time through Mara. The woman I'd fallen in love with hadn't been taking charity from my father, she'd been honoring a promise to a dying woman who'd seen something in her son worth saving. And I'd let her walk away. I found the key exactly where she'd said it would be, taped under the bottom drawer of the small dresser in her sparse room. As I held it in my palm, I realized that this tiny piece of metal represented the only connection I had left to both the women who had truly loved me, my mother and Mara. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made me look up. My father stood in the doorway, his face a mask of cold satisfaction. "She's gone," he said. "Packed her things and left without even asking for a reference. I suppose that proves what kind of person she really was." "It proves what kind of person you are," I replied, standing up and facing him. "She left because you threatened to destroy her life if she stayed." "I threatened to reveal the truth about her manipulation. If she was innocent, she would have stayed and fought. She left because she loves me more than she loves herself. Something you'll never understand." My father's expression didn't change. "It doesn't matter now. She's gone, and you have a choice to make. Victoria Ashworth is still in the sitting room, along with the others. You can salvage this situation if you act quickly. I'm not marrying any of them. Then you're choosing poverty over prosperity. Your trust fund expires in 18 months, Evan. Without my support, you'll have nothing. Then I'll have nothing." For the first time since I'd known him, my father looked genuinely surprised. "You're serious. Dead serious. You'll regret this decision for the rest of your life." "Maybe. But I'll regret not making it even more." He stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked away. I heard him in the sitting room, making apologies to the 5 women, explaining that I was having some kind of breakdown and that the evening was over. I heard cars starting in the driveway, voices raised in anger and disappointment, the sound of my father's carefully constructed plans falling apart. But I didn't care about any of that. I only cared about finding Mara. I spent the next 3 days searching for her. I called every hotel in the city, checked with employment agencies, even hired a private investigator. But Mara Williams had vanished as completely as if she'd never existed. The investigator told me she'd withdrawn her savings, closed her bank account, and left no forwarding address. "It's like she planned this," he said, handing me his final report. "People don't disappear this thoroughly by accident." On the 4th day, I went to First National Bank with the key Mara had left me. The safety deposit box contained documents that confirmed everything she'd written in her letter, and more. My mother's will, which I'd never seen, included provisions for a trust fund that my father had never mentioned. Legal documents showing that my mother had suspected my father of financial impropriety and had hidden assets to protect me. And photographs of my mother and Mara together, laughing and talking like the friends Mara had described. But the most devastating discovery was a letter my mother had written to me, dated just days before her death. "My dearest Evan. If you're reading this, it means Mara kept her promise to watch over you, and you've discovered the truth about the arrangements I made. I pray that you're old enough now to understand why I did what I did. Your father is not a bad man, but he's a man who believes that money can solve any problem and control any situation. I've watched him become harder over the years, more calculating, more willing to sacrifice relationships for profit. I was terrified of what would happen to you if you only had his influence. Mara Williams is a good woman, Evan. She's strong and kind and honest in ways that are rare in our world. I asked her to stay close to you not because I wanted to control your life, but because I wanted you to know what real love looks like. The kind of love that asks for nothing and gives everything. If you found this letter, it probably means you've discovered your feelings for her. Don't let your father's world convince you that love is a luxury you can't afford. Don't let anyone tell you that worth is measured in dollars rather than character. Choose love, my son. Choose the woman who sees your heart instead of your bank account. Choose the life that makes you happy, not the life that makes you wealthy. I love you more than all the money in the world. Your mother. I sat in that sterile bank vault, surrounded by the evidence of my mother's love and my father's deception, and cried for the first time since I was 8 years old. Everything I'd believed about my family, about my life, about my future, had been built on lies. My father had stolen my mother's final gift to me, the knowledge that I was loved unconditionally, and had spent 20 years trying to turn me into a man she would have been ashamed of. But even worse than discovering my father's betrayal was realizing that I'd lost the one person who could have helped me understand what my mother had been trying to tell me. Mara was gone, and I had no idea how to find her. When I got home, I found my father waiting in his study with Ashley Webb and a stack of legal documents. "Evan," my father said without looking up, "we need to discuss your future." "I don't have anything to discuss with you." "Actually, you do. Ashley has prepared papers that will formalize your disinheritance. Sign them, and you'll receive a modest settlement that will allow you to live comfortably, if not luxuriously. Refuse to sign, and you'll get nothing when your trust fund expires." I looked at the papers, at the final severing of ties between my father and me, and felt something like relief. "Where do I sign?" Ashley looked surprised. "Evan, you should read these carefully. Once you sign, there's no going back." "I don't want to go back." I signed every document they put in front of me, officially giving up any claim to the Cole fortune. When I was finished, my father finally looked at me. "You're making a mistake that will haunt you for the rest of your life," he said. "The only mistake I made was waiting this long to make it." I left that house the same day, taking only the clothes I could fit in a suitcase and the documents from my mother's safety deposit box. I rented a small apartment across town, found a job at a non-profit organization that helped low-income families, and tried to build a life that would have made my mother proud. But every day, I thought about Mara. Every night, I wondered where she was, whether she was safe, whether she ever thought about me. I'd lost my inheritance, my family, and my future, but none of that mattered compared to losing her. 3 months after that disastrous dinner party, I was walking home from work when I saw a familiar figure getting out of a taxi in front of my apartment building. My heart stopped. It was Zoe Williams, Mara's daughter, and she was looking for me. "Mr. Cole," she said, approaching me with the confident stride of someone who was used to solving problems. "I'm Zoe Williams. I think we need to talk." She was beautiful in the same way her mother was beautiful, not flashy or artificial, but with a warmth and intelligence that made you want to know her better. She had Mara's eyes and Mara's smile, but there was something else in her expression, something that looked like determination mixed with hope. "Is your mother, is she okay?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "She's alive," Zoe said. "But she's not okay. And neither are you, from what I can see." "Where is she?" "That's what we need to talk about. Can we go somewhere private?" I led her up to my small apartment, acutely aware of how different it was from the mansion where I'd grown up. But Zoe didn't seem to notice or care about the modest furnishings or the lack of luxury. "My mother told me everything," she said once we were sitting across from each other at my tiny kitchen table. "About your father's threats, about the money, about why she left. She also told me about the letter she left you, and about your mother's trust fund. Then you know why I can't find her. She doesn't want to be found. She doesn't want to be found because she thinks she's protecting you. But she's wrong about something important, and I think you are too." "What do you mean?" Zoe reached into her purse and pulled out a thick envelope. "My mother has been keeping secrets, Mr. Cole. Secrets that change everything about this situation. Secrets that your father never discovered, even with all his investigations." She handed me the envelope, and I saw my name written on it in Mara's handwriting. "What is this?" "The truth," Zoe said. "The whole truth. And once you read it, you're going to understand why my mother didn't just walk away from you, she ran towards something that's going to change both your lives forever." As I opened that envelope, I had no idea that the darkest descent was about to become the beginning of the most incredible ascent of my life. The secrets Mara had been keeping weren't just about the past, they were about a future that neither of us had dared to imagine. The rock bottom I thought I'd hit was actually the foundation for something extraordinary. And the woman I thought I'd lost forever was about to prove that sometimes the greatest love stories begin when everything else falls apart. I opened the envelope with trembling hands, and what I found inside changed everything I thought I knew about loss, love, and what it meant to fight for someone who mattered. The first document was a birth certificate. Zoe Williams, born 27 years ago. But it wasn't the name in the father section that made my blood run cold, it was the name of the hospital. Cole Memorial Hospital. The hospital my family had built and funded for 3 generations. The second document was a medical record from that same hospital, dated 28 years ago. A record of treatment for a young woman named Mara Williams, age 18, admitted for complications during pregnancy. The attending physician's notes mentioned significant trauma and patient refuses to identify father of child. The third document was a police report, also 28 years old. A report of sexual assault filed by an 18-year-old woman named Mara Williams against a man whose name had been redacted, but whose description made my stomach turn, wealthy businessman, approximately 45 years old, known to victim's family through employment. And the final document was a legal settlement agreement, signed by Mara Williams and witnessed by my mother, Elizabeth Cole. A settlement that paid for Mara's medical expenses, her housing, and a job with the Cole family, in exchange for her silence about the identity of her attacker. I looked up at Zoe, who was watching me with eyes that held 27 years of carefully guarded pain. "Your father," I whispered. "My biological father," she corrected. "The man who raped my mother when she was 18 years old and working as a temp in his office." The room spun around me. Harrison Cole, my father, had assaulted Mara when she was barely more than a child. And my mother had known. Had helped cover it up. Had brought Mara into our house not just out of kindness, but out of guilt. "That's why she could never tell you how she felt," Zoe continued, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was revealing. "That's why she always kept her distance. You're the son of the man who destroyed her life. But the letter she left me, the things she said about my mother, were all true. Your mother did become her friend. Your mother did try to protect both of you. But she also knew that if the truth ever came out, it would destroy you to learn what your father had done." I stared at the documents, my mind reeling. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because my mother is dying." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What?" "Ovarian cancer. Stage 4. She has maybe 6 months left, and she's spending them in a hospice in Oregon, convinced that she did the right thing by walking away from you. I have to see her." "That's what I was hoping you'd say." Zoe leaned forward, and I saw my own desperation reflected in her eyes. "But there's something else you need to know. Something that changes everything about this situation." She pulled out another document, a DNA test result dated just 2 weeks ago. "I had this done after my mother told me the truth about my father. I needed to know for sure." She pointed to the results. "Harrison Cole is not my biological father." I stared at the paper, not understanding. "But the police report, the settlement, were all based on my mother's belief about what happened that night." "But she was wrong, Evan. She was 18, traumatized, and confused. The man who assaulted her worked for your father's company, but he wasn't your father." "Then who?" "Ashley Webb." The name hit me like a thunderbolt. Ashley Webb, my father's attorney and closest friend. The man who had been in that office just days ago, helping my father plan my disinheritance. The man who had known about Mara's past and had helped my father use it against her. Ashley Webb raped my mother 28 years ago, Zoe continued. Your mother discovered what had happened and confronted your father about it. But instead of going to the police, they decided to handle it quietly. Ashley was too valuable to the company to lose, so they paid my mother to keep quiet and gave her a job where they could keep an eye on her. My mother knew Ashley was the one. Your mother suspected, but she could never prove it. And my mother was too traumatized to remember clearly. It wasn't until I started asking questions and demanding DNA tests that the truth came out. I felt sick. My entire family had been built on a lie, a cover-up that had protected a rapist and condemned an innocent woman to 20 years of silence and shame. There's more, Zoe said gently. The reason my mother ran wasn't just because she was afraid of your father's threats. She ran because Ashley Webb is still alive, still powerful, and still dangerous. When she realized that choosing you would mean exposing the truth about what happened, she knew he would try to destroy both of you to protect himself. Where is she now? Sunset Hospice in Portland. She's been there for 2 months, and she refuses to let me tell anyone where she is. She thinks she's protecting you by staying away. I stood up, my mind racing. I have to go to her. It's not that simple. She won't see you, Evan. She's convinced that being with you would put you in danger, and she'd rather die alone than risk your safety. Then what do you suggest? Zoe smiled for the first time since she'd arrived, and I saw a flash of the determination that had gotten her through medical school. I suggest we give her a choice she can't refuse. What kind of choice? The choice between dying alone with her secrets, or living long enough to see justice done and love triumph over fear. She pulled out her phone and showed me a news article dated that morning. Prominent attorney Ashley Webb under investigation for historical sexual assault claims. I filed a police report yesterday, she said. With DNA evidence, witness statements, and documentation of the cover-up. Ashley Webb is going to face justice for what he did, whether my mother cooperates or not. And my father? Will probably face charges as an accessory after the fact. Your mother's papers from the safety deposit box include evidence that she documented the cover-up, probably as insurance against Ashley. I stared at this remarkable young woman who had just blown up my entire world in order to save her mother's life. What do you need from me? I need you to come to Portland with me. I need you to walk into that hospice room and tell my mother that you know the truth, that you don't care about the past, and that you're not going to let her die alone. What if she still refuses to see me? Then we'll camp outside her door until she changes her mind. But I don't think she will refuse. I think she's been waiting 20 years for someone to love her enough to fight for her, even when she's too scared to fight for herself. I looked at the documents scattered across my kitchen table, evidence of rape, cover-ups, lies, and decades of pain. But I also saw something else. Proof that love could survive anything, that truth could emerge from even the darkest secrets, and that sometimes the most impossible choice was actually the only choice that made sense. When do we leave? I asked. Tonight. I have 2 tickets on the red-eye to Portland. Zoe, why are you doing this? You barely know me. She was quiet for a moment, then said, because my mother has spent my entire life sacrificing her happiness for other people. She sacrificed it for me, for you, for your family, for everyone except herself. And because I've watched her love you from a distance for 20 years, never believing she deserved to be loved back. She deserves everything. Then prove it. Come to Portland and tell her that. Tell her that you choose her, not despite her past but because of who she became in spite of it. Tell her that you're not going to let fear win. I packed a bag while Zoe waited, my hands shaking as I threw clothes into a suitcase. I was about to fly across the country to fight for a woman who might refuse to see me, to declare my love to someone who was dying, to take on powerful men who had spent decades covering up their crimes. It was terrifying. It was impossible. It was the most important thing I would ever do. As we headed to the airport, Zoe handed me one more document, a letter Mara had written to me but never sent, dated just after she'd left. She wrote this the day she got her diagnosis, Zoe said. She made me promise never to give it to you unless she was dying and you'd learn the truth about everything. I opened the letter as our plane lifted off, and through my tears, I read the words of a woman who had loved me enough to walk away, but who had never stopped hoping that someday, somehow, love would find a way to win. The impossible choice wasn't whether to go to her, it was whether I was brave enough to believe that love could conquer 20 years of fear, shame, and carefully constructed walls. But as I read Mara's words, I realized that the choice had already been made. It had been made 20 years ago when she jumped into a pool to save a drowning child. It had been made every day since then when she chose to stay close to me despite the pain it caused her. And it was being made now, as I flew through the night toward the woman who had taught me what real love looked like. The catalyst for transformation wasn't just my decision to fight for her, it was the realization that she had been fighting for me all along, in ways I had never understood until now. Portland was 3 hours away, and I was about to discover whether love really could triumph over fear, whether truth really could set us free, and whether a dying woman could find the strength to choose happiness over the safety of solitude. The impossible choice was about to become the most possible thing in the world. The Sunset Hospice in Portland looked nothing like the sterile medical facilities I'd expected. It was a converted Victorian mansion surrounded by gardens, designed to feel more like a home than a hospital. But as Zoe and I walked up the front steps at 7 in the morning, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. "She's in room 12, Zoe said, her voice tight with emotion. "But Evan, you need to prepare yourself. The cancer has progressed quickly. She doesn't look like the woman you remember." I nodded, but nothing could have prepared me for what I saw when we reached her door. Through the small window, I could see Mara sitting in a chair by the window, looking out at the garden. She was thin, too thin, and her beautiful dark hair had been replaced by a colorful headscarf. But when she turned slightly, I saw her profile, and she was still the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. "She won't see me," Zoe whispered. "She made the staff promise not to let me in unless it was an emergency. She says she doesn't want me to watch her die. But you're her daughter. And you're the man she loves. She's protecting both of us the only way she knows how." I knocked softly on the door. "Mara?" "It's Evan." The silence that followed was deafening. Then I heard movement, the sound of a chair scraping against the floor. "Go away," her voice came through the door, weaker than I remembered but still unmistakably hers. "Please, Evan. Just go away." "I'm not going anywhere. I know the truth, Mara. I know about Ashley Webb. I know about my father's cover-up. I know about everything." Another long silence. Then the door opened slowly, and I was looking into the eyes that had haunted my dreams for months. She was wearing a simple blue robe, and despite the weight loss and the obvious signs of illness, she was still the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. "You shouldn't be here," she said, but she didn't close the door. "Yes, I should. I should have been here months ago. Evan, you don't understand. I understand that Ashley Webb raped you when you were 18. I understand that my family covered it up. I understand that you've been carrying that secret for 27 years, thinking it made you unworthy of love." Tears started streaming down her face. "It does make me unworthy. I'm damaged, Evan. I'm broken. And now I'm dying. You're not broken. You're the strongest person I've ever known." I stepped into the room, and she didn't stop me. The space was small but comfortable, filled with flowers that Zoe had obviously been sending. On the bedside table, I saw a photo of us from years ago, a picture I didn't even remember being taken, of me and Mara laughing about something in the garden. "You kept that," I said, pointing to the photo. "I kept a lot of things I shouldn't have. Mara, I need you to listen to me. I need you to hear what I'm saying and believe it." She sat down heavily in her chair, and I knelt beside her so we were at eye level. "I love you," I said. "I love you not despite what happened to you, but because of who you became in spite of it. I love your strength, your kindness, your ability to see good in people even when they don't deserve it. I love the way you raised an incredible daughter while taking care of everyone else. I love the way you saved my life when I was 8, and the way you've been saving it every day since." "You can't love me," she whispered. "I'm the daughter of your father's victim. I'm a reminder of the worst thing your family ever did. You're not my father's victim. You're Ashley Webb's victim. And you're not a reminder of the worst thing my family did, you're proof of the best thing my mother ever did." I pulled out the letter my mother had written, the one I'd found in the safety deposit box. She knew, Mara. She knew what Ashley had done, and she knew that bringing you into our house was the only way to protect you and make sure you had a future. She didn't hire you out of guilt, she hired you out of love. Mara read the letter with shaking hands, tears falling onto the paper. "She never told me she knew. Because she was protecting you, just like you've been protecting me. But the protection ends now. Ashley Webb was arrested yesterday morning." Her head snapped up. "What?" "Zoe filed charges. With DNA evidence, witness statements, and documentation of the cover-up. He's going to prison, Mara. He's going to pay for what he did to you. But your father is probably going to be charged as an accessory. And I don't care. I signed away my inheritance months ago. I don't want anything that was built on covering up what happened to you." She stared at me like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You gave up everything." "I gave up money. I kept everything that mattered. Evan, you don't understand. I'm dying. Even if we could be together, even if this could work, I have maybe 6 months left. Then we have 6 months. 6 months to be happy, to be together, to show the world that love wins. 6 months to prove that you deserve every good thing that life has to offer. It's not enough time.